Basketball mixtapes have always been a very big part of hoops culture, and over the years, there have been some absolutely iconic high school mixtapes that have really cemented themselves in high school mixtape history. With this in mind, I thought it'd be fun to rewatch 30 of the most viral and iconic high school mixtapes to ever grace the internet and put them into a tier list. And just to really quickly lay out the grading criteria, there's a few things I'm going to be looking at. First off is editing. How is everything synced? What are the visuals looking like? Does it look like a high quality edit? Next, I'm going to be looking at highlight variety, meaning is there a good mixture of dunks, ankle breakers, assists, defense, and so on. I think the more variety, the better. Next is the music or backing track. This one's obvious. I think having a good backing track to pair with the highlights is really what elevates a mixtape and makes it memorable. And lastly, I'm going to be factoring in my own personal enjoyment watching these mixtapes. How entertained was I? How much rewatchability does it have? Make sense? And for those curious how I chose which 30 mixtapes to rank, I essentially went by views. The cutoff I used was at least 1 million views, since I think that's kind of the benchmark for iconic mixtape territory. I'm sure there's a few that I totally forgot to include, so apologies for that in advance. Maybe I can make a part 2 with all the other ones I didn't include in this video, so just let me know. This also seems like a good time to emphasize that this tier list is entirely my opinion, so if you disagree, that's totally cool, and feel free to leave in the comments any changes you'd make. If you enjoyed this type of content and want to see more, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more sports content. Now without further ado, let's dive in. Starting things off in no particular order, I've got the mixtape that's actually many people's favorite, and that's Akil Carr, specifically this one by Hoop Mixtape with 10 million views. Now, after rewatching this mixtape for the first time in quite a while, I can definitely see why many people have this as their favorite. The highlights are top notch, it's got a very nice variety of ankle breakers, nice passes, tough shot making, even dunks, which is kind of crazy, taking into account that Akil is literally 5'6". The editing is also pretty solid, it's very simplistic, nothing flashy or over the top, but sometimes slow motion and syncing to the music is all you need, and this mixtape definitely does that very well. The music is also pretty solid. It's not my favorite backing track of all time, but it certainly doesn't hurt the mixtape in any way. So yeah, this is widely considered one of the best and most entertaining mixtapes of all time, and I agree. I loved watching it growing up, and I still really enjoy it all these years later, but I wouldn't go quite far enough to say that it's my personal favorite, so I think I've got to put it in A tier. Next up is another absolutely legendary mixtape that I know many people are fond of, and that's 7th Wood's freshman year mixtape made by Hoop Mixtape with 16 million views. That is insane. And I'm gonna be honest, man, I love this one too. First and foremost, I gotta mention the backtrack used for the mixtape. Absolute banger, one of my favorites, no question. In terms of highlights, it definitely is a bit dunk heavy, but in fairness, the dunks are insane, especially when you take into account that he's literally 14 years old in these highlights. Plus, there's definitely a good amount of nice ball handling, passing, and crazy defensive plays included as well. Similar to Akil Carr's mixtape, very simplistic editing, but I've already stated that I don't really mind that at all. I think it works well. So like I said, this is another legendary mixtape, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have this one on repeat all the time growing up, and even watching it again for the purpose of this video, I had to replay it purely for entertainment just because I love it so much, but I don't love it quite enough to give it that #1 spot, so this is another one I'm going to put in A tier. Alright, so now we're moving on to Lonzo Ball's senior year mixtape. It's made by Baller Visions and has racked up 4.1 million views. Now, I just want to preface right now that this is probably in my personal top 2 favorite high school mixtapes of all time. So obviously, I might have some bias here, but I want to try and not let my personal opinions overshadow where I think it really belongs. So anyways, first thing I want to point out with this mixtape is that I think it's very well edited. The opening edit with the countdown is totally sick. Everything is very high quality. The pacing and syncing to the backing track is definitely among the best I've ever seen. And speaking of the backing track, another one of my personal favorites. Listening to this mixtape with good quality earbuds or headphones is definitely an experience. The bass goes absolutely crazy. Now, where I think the mixtape kind of takes a hit is with the highlights. They're certainly not bad, but like literally 80% of the mixtape is like wide open dunks and uncontested alley-oops. And I'd be lying if I said that some didn't get a little bit repetitive. There's some nice blocks, assists, and 3-pointers sprinkled in, but not nearly enough in my opinion. And Lonzo doesn't have some crazy dunk package to make essentially a dunk montage super entertaining to watch. So while I'd personally love to put this in A tier, realistically, it's just not quite at that level. Still an incredible mixtape and a guilty pleasure of mine, but there's just other mixtapes coming up that are just objectively a bit better. High B tier in my opinion. So up next, we got Austin Rivers' senior year Hoop Mixtape, which as of today is sitting at 4.6 million views. I know a lot of people really love this one and would probably put it in S tier, but I'm personally not quite that high on it if I'm being honest. I think it's in large part carried by the highlights. Austin Rivers was an absolute menace in high school, so there's no shortage of dunks, crazy ball handling, assists, and other crazy highlights. Clips are not the problem whatsoever, but I'm not gonna lie, man, that backing track, I just wasn't really feeling it to be honest, and just in my viewing experience, it kind of drained some of the hype and entertainment around the highlights. Maybe I sound crazy right now, but that's honestly just how I feel. And for the editing, it was alright. Once again, very bare bones, but no complaints from me. So yeah, this might be the first one people disagree with, but this mixtape was definitely a bit underwhelming to me, and frankly, I don't think I'd ever find myself watching it again, so for me, it's B tier. But at the same time, you know, it's definitely still a very solid mixtape, and something does need to be said for the fact that so many people enjoy it. I always see people putting this one in their top 3 mixtapes, so with that in mind, I think it's going to sneak into A tier. Moving on now, we've got the first Ball is Life mixtape of the video, and they're getting off to a strong start with Zion Williamson's senior year mixtape, which has brought in 5.1 million views. Now, right off the bat with editing, I think it's top notch. In my opinion, of all the major basketball media outlets, you know, like Ball is Life, Baller Visions, Hoop Mixtapes, and so on, I think Ball is Life consistently produces the most well-edited mixtapes, and this one's no exception. As for the music, I think they picked the perfect track. Pairing a remix of I Believe I Can Fly with Zion Williamson's highlights is just so fitting. I don't know how anyone can say anything bad about the backing track. And for the highlights, I mean, come on, it's Zion Williamson. The guy was an absolute monster in high school, absurd amounts of athleticism for his size, and the clips very much reflect that. Now, it's obviously very dunk heavy, that was pretty much a given, but there was a surprising amount of variety in defense, shooting, and even a little ball handling as well. Plus, with half the dunks being like 360s, windmills, and whatnot, you'd be very hard pressed to find this mixtape repetitive or boring. All around a very entertaining mixtape, not the best of all time, but certainly up there, A tier. Alright, so earlier we discussed Lonzo Ball's mixtape, and now we move on to his youngest brother, LaMelo Ball, and his sophomore year Ball is Life mixtape, currently sitting at 3 million views. And this one, it's alright. Not my favorite, not the worst, just kinda mid in my opinion. Surprisingly, the thing that I like the least about it is actually the editing. I can see the vision Ball is Life had of the whole comic book thing. Like, on paper, the idea is definitely interesting, and I'm sure some people out there did find it cool, but me personally, I just found it kinda corny, to be honest. The rest of the editing is very solid, but the comic thing is just, could have gone without it. The music is also nothing spectacular. This is one of the longer mixtapes, so there's actually 2 tracks they use. The first one's cool, I like it, but the second one is just a bit too mellow and low energy for my liking. The highlights are easily the best part, lots of crazy handles, assists, and deep threes, but at the same time, it's LaMelo, so no dunks or defense, which definitely knocks it down a bit. I'd probably put it in B tier. Up next, we've got another certified iconic mixtape with Marcus Levette's Volume 1 Hoop mixtape, checking in with 8.9 million views. Now, right off the bat, this is one of the shortest mixtapes in the video. It might even be the shortest. I don't remember honestly off the top of my head, but it packs a lot into that time. The title of the mixtape does not lie. The handles on this kid were totally insane. Like, I've never seen so many snatched ankle highlights from one player in my life. There's also a lot of impressive scoring highlights and passes, not really much defense or dunking, which I knocked LaMelo's mixtape for, but Marcus's handles completely outclassed LaMelo's from an entertainment and flashiness standpoint in my opinion, so I'm not going to criticize that to the same degree. This is just overall really entertaining and really captures that classic hoop mixtape vibe. Combine that with really simplistic yet solid editing to pair with a solid backing track, and you've got yourself another absolutely iconic mixtape, A tier. Now we're moving on to Canada's finest, Andrew Wiggins' senior year hoop mixtape with 7.6 million views. Now, believe it or not, I actually never got around to watching this one growing up, so my first time viewing it was actually for this video. And first thing to note, I knew Andrew Wiggins was a beast in high school. That's what people had always said, but man, this mixtape finally made me understand why this guy was so hyped up. These highlights made this man look like a basketball god. Dunking, shooting, ball handling, passing, defense, this mixtape literally showed it all. The editing is spot on, the backing track was doing its thing. Yet another A tier mixtape in my opinion. Alright, so now we're moving on to Kyrie, Uncle Drew Irving, and his official Ball is Life mixtape, currently sitting at 5.2 million views. You know, I'm gonna be honest, I was a bit underwhelmed by it. Maybe it was just the fact that I had super high expectations since it was Kyrie, but the highlights were just, they were cool, very impressive, but I don't know, I guess I was just expecting some totally insane clips, but there just really wasn't any. Like I said though, still very impressive highlights, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm discounting Kyrie at all. Editing wise, it was fine I suppose. I know I said I don't mind some bare bones editing, but man, this one is just very, very lax on the editing. They basically just threw a bunch of clips together and called it a day. Virtually no editing outside of the occasional slow-mo. And this is the time period when Ball is Life started using those darkened edges in all their videos, and I hate it so much, honestly. Like, I just think it looks so bad. Maybe I'm just being picky, but like, no. The backtrack is fine, no complaints on my end. So overall, this is just kind of a very solid but nothing special mixtape, going in B tier. Up next, we've got the infamous Ben Simmons, and we're going to be looking at his senior year mixtape by Home Team Hoops, which has brought in 3 million views. Now, I admit, I was one of those people that thought Ben Simmons was going to be an absolute star in the NBA, and a large reason for why I thought that was because of this mixtape right here. Because in my defense, he looked like the total package in these highlights. There was a nice variety of dunks, ball handling, passing, defense, hell, even shooting. Who would have thought? I think the editing is also on point. Overall, I think the clips are very well synced to the music, which I think the backing track is also pretty good. It is a bit of a longer mixtape, a little over 5 minutes, which is fine. It doesn't really feel like it drags on too much. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It's well put together, but it's not really one that I'd come back to rewatch as much as the others. So I'd say this is a high B tier. Moving on now, we've got one that I'm sure many of you likely forgot about, and that's Cassius Stanley's freshman year Ball is Life mixtape, which as of now sits at 1.8 million views. So I mainly remember Cassius for being one of those bouncy, uber athletic guys that threw down crazy dunks, and there was definitely a good amount of that in this mixtape, but I was also surprised by the variety of highlights showing off ball handling, shooting, and some defense as well, so that was cool to see. The editing was also very high quality and well put together, as I usually come to expect from Ball is Life mixtapes. Their music selection is also usually pretty good, I would say, and this one's no exception. You know, I wouldn't go as far to say this is like a super iconic mixtape, but it's your standard, high quality, entertaining Ball is Life mixtape. Not too many negatives or complaints that I have, just very solid. Another one that I'm going to throw in B tier. Coming up next, we've got another short king as we're checking out Trey Jefferson's Ball is Life mixtape, currently at 4.4 million views. First thing I gotta say is if you like Akil Carr's mixtape, you'll probably like this one as well. They're very similar, and I'm not just saying that because of their heights. Like, their playstyles are basically carbon copies of each other. Both offer the same type of highlights with a lot of crazy ball handling and tough shot making. Trey can dunk like Akil as well, which is pretty cool. I think Akil has the slightly more dynamic and entertaining highlights, but they're honestly not too far off. Can't complain about the editing either. It's synced pretty good. The slow-mo's on point. The backtrack could be a bit better in my opinion, but it certainly works. I mean, just a very well-made mixtape. Wasn't revolutionary in any way, but it's undoubtedly entertaining, and it's always cool to see these shorter guys putting in work on the court. Another B tier. Moving on now, we've got the man that was dubbed to be the next Kevin Durant, and I'm of course talking about Brandon Ingram and his senior year mixtape made by Ball is Life, coming in at 1.6 million views. And looking at the highlights, you can definitely see a lot of KD in there. He's got the build, you know, super scrawny, but could absolutely get buckets. There was a lot of highlights that showed off his versatility as a ball handler, as well as his capabilities as a defender. So a lot of variety, which is nice to see. For editing, it's more of that very simplistic yet effective style, lots of slow-mo and syncing to the music. And speaking of the music, the backtrack is really what kind of holds this mixtape back for me. Like, I don't know, it's not the worst, but I definitely think they could have chosen a better track, but oh well, I guess. So yeah, I'd say this is a really solid mixtape. It just doesn't really stand out from the others in any major way, and I personally don't really see myself coming back to rewatch it anytime soon, so C tier. Alright, now we've got the man who, in my opinion, has one of the most underrated mixtapes out there, and that's Josh Jackson's Ball is Life junior year mixtape, currently sitting at 1.8 million views. This might be a really hot take, but this mixtape really reminded me a lot of Andrew Wiggins' mixtape, which, as we talked about earlier, is one of the most iconic ones out there. Like, Josh Jackson looked absolutely insane in these highlights, throwing down poster dunks, snatching ankles, making crazy defensive plays. It's all there. I think the editing really stands out as well. It's nothing super crazy or over the top by any means, but you can just tell that they put a little bit more time into putting it together. And on top of that, I think the backing track slaps, a lot of energy behind it. So I might get some heat for this one, but I'm going to put Josh Jackson's mixtape in A tier. Up next, we've got another mixtape that I surprisingly never came across growing up, and that's Quay Parker, specifically this one by Hoop Mixtape with 5 million views. And after watching it for the first time, man, absolutely nasty. The dunks this man was pulling off were absolutely insane. And let's be real, this whole mixtape is essentially just a dunk montage. Yeah, there's the occasional other highlight thrown in there, but it's the dunking that single-handedly elevates this mixtape to iconic status. And I think everything else is also very well executed with the editing and the smooth backing track. I know I'm kind of breaking one of my criteria with highlight variety, but this mixtape is just too iconic, and I can't deny just how entertained I was watching it. A tier for sure. Alright, so up now we've got the young bull himself, Colin Sexton, with his official senior year mixtape by Hoop Diamonds, currently sitting at 2 million views. Now, two things about this mixtape that stand out right off the bat. First, holy shit, this thing is long, literally 7.5 minutes. Second, I love watching this dude play, just so much heart and passion, and it really shows in the highlights. There's a nice variety of shooting, handles, passing, defense, and so on, and even with it being so long, the highlights really don't fall off much at all. Editing is fine, nothing too noteworthy, and with it being over 7 minutes long, long, there's obviously going to be multiple tracks featured, and I honestly don't really have any complaints about any of them. They all do the job. So yeah, another B tier mixtape. Moving on now, I'm not sure how many of you remember Jelly Fam and all the guys a part of it, but we've got one of its members right here with Javon Quinterly and his 1.6 million view official mixtape made by In The Lab. Now, this is a really unique mixtape, probably the most unique one in the whole video. It's another long one, sitting at over 8 minutes long. I guess technically 7 since the last minute or so was just straight up raw game footage, but whatever. But for those that don't know who Dev or In The Lab is, they were known in the past for creating like these basketball documentaries and storytelling videos of sorts, and you can definitely see elements of that in this mixtape. The intro with Dev introducing Javon was pretty cool, and with the channel's background in film production essentially, it was obviously high quality and well edited and put together. And Dev's videos have always had good music, so of course the background tracks are on point. Highlights were also good, a lot of variety. Layups went crazy, of course. This is a member of Jelly Fam after all. So yeah man, from a production standpoint, this is definitely one of the better mixtapes out there, and with all the other elements as well, I think this definitely deserves an A tier ranking. Up next is another name that I'm sure many of you forgot about, and that's Corey Sanders, and we're looking at his Home Team Hoops mixtape, which sits at 1.6 million views. Low-key, I was thinking it'd have a bit more views than that, but it is what it is, I guess. Once again, another long one at just over 7 minutes. But anyways, this was a mixtape that a decent amount of people had always hyped up, so I went into it with pretty high expectations, and while it didn't quite reach them, it was still pretty solid overall. I really like the highlights, a lot of variety, including quite a bit of him dancing, which I thought was pretty funny. I don't know anything about this guy, but I can just tell he's hilarious to be around. Outside of that, editing was about on par with most of the other mixtapes we've seen. The background tracks are cool. Overall, I feel there's a few of you that probably put it in A tier, but personally, I feel it belongs more so near the top of B. Perhaps a little bit of an overrated mixtape in my opinion. Moving on now, we've got Trevor Dunbar and his official mixtape by Ye Area's Finest, currently sitting at 2.1 million views. Now, just something I want to point out, I'm sure most of you guys have noticed as well, but this older mixtape era, like the early to mid 2010s, really like to highlight these shorter, shifty, and flashy guards. We've already looked at guys like Akil Carr, Trey Jefferson, I throw Corey Sanders in there as well, and Trevor Dunbar was basically in that same boat. This mixtape showcased a lot of handles, flashy passes, all that. And something with the editing that was kind of changed up a bit that I actually really liked was how the mixtape synced the backtrack to the crossovers and passes instead of just the baskets. It's a really subtle thing that most people probably don't care about, but I thought was pretty cool. Another solid mixtape. I'll put it in B tier. Alright, so now we're getting really old school with this next one, because we're taking a look at Brandon Jennings' official mixtape from Ball Is Life, sitting at 1.8 million views. There's some people that refer to this as the grandfather of basketball mixtapes, and this fossil right here has probably been around longer than some of you watching this video, over 15 years old. And if I'm being real, you can definitely tell. Some of these clips, they're something, man. But I want to make this clear, the age of this mixtape does not matter. I actually really like it. The editing is actually pretty impressive, and I'd argue is better than many modern mixtapes. I'm a big fan of the backing tracks they used as well, and in terms of highlights, I've always really enjoyed watching Brandon Jennings hoop. He's just so talented and entertaining, and I encourage all of you to watch some of his highlights, whether that's high school, NBA, whatever. You will not regret it. So overall, based on the mixtape itself, as well as the influence it had going forward, I've got to put this one in A tier. Moving on, we've got probably the most unique player in this video, and that's Chase Adams and his 7th grade official mixtape from Ball Is Life Midwest, sitting at a whopping 16 million views. Now, I'm going to address the obvious with the fact that pretty much the main entertainment from this video comes from the fact that Chase is just so tiny compared to everyone else. It's just both impressive and also really funny, the kinds of things he's able to do at his size. And I want to start with that because outside of that, I really don't think the mixtape is anything crazy, and it's not really the highlights I have a problem with. At the end of the day, this is 7th grade basketball. I'm not expecting like windmill dunks or anything. It's more the editing than anything else. I talked about Kyrie's mixtape being lax on editing, but this is even more egregious. There was no effort put into editing this thing outside of slapping all the clips together, and that paired with an average backing track just makes for a very meh viewing experience. If this was any other player, I'd probably throw this in C tier to be honest, but watching a 4'11" kid going crazy on the court is pretty entertaining, I'm not gonna lie, so I say it sneaks into B tier. So up next now is Dennis Smith Jr.'s sophomore year hoop mixtape, currently sitting at 1.8 million views. This is another one of those mixtapes that just brings the total package. The highlights are very entertaining, especially for him being a sophomore. The editing is simplistic yet effective, really good backing track. Yeah, not really much more to add to be honest. I really enjoyed watching it, and a lot of other people really like it as well, so yeah, A tier. Moving on now, we've got Shaquille Johnson's hoop mixtape sitting at 3.5 million views. Oh my goodness, can this guy jump out the gym? Literally one of the highest and most effortless effortless verticals I've ever seen. Now, with this in mind, it is worth noting that this is literally a dunk montage. I think I counted like 2 highlights in the whole thing that weren't dunks, but while it does lack variety, I can't say that I wasn't thoroughly entertained throughout, and in fairness, the title does kind of give it away, so I really can't knock it there. The editing and music is also on point, so no complaints there. The mixtape is very similar to Quay Parker's, who I put in A tier, and honestly, I think I like Quay's just slightly more, and I think that's the general consensus as well, so I'm gonna put this one in B tier. Alright, so this next one is actually a pretty interesting one. We've got childhood prodigy Jordan McCabe's freshman year mixtape by Ball is Life Midwest, sitting at 3.1 million views. Definitely some pretty cool highlights in this one. I completely forgot how cold Jordan was in high school. A lot of nice ball handling, assists, and shooting. Strangely enough though, this is another mixtape where Ball is Life just couldn't be bothered to edit it, I guess. Just kinda a collection of clips thrown together. I'm also not too high on the backing track, to be honest. It might have been more enjoyable if the highlights were actually synced to it, but like I said, they didn't do that. Overall, just a really meh mixtape. The highlights are easily the most memorable part, but at the end of the day, Ball is Life and even Jordan McCabe on his own have way better mixtapes, so C tier. So this next mixtape is actually one that I wasn't originally planning on including in this video since there's a few others that have more views, but upon doing my research, this is one that a lot of people brought up for being iconic, and that's Gabe York's official Ball is Life mixtape, currently at 1.2 million views. Like I said, I wasn't even planning on including this one originally, but I'm really glad I checked it out because it is pretty good. I'd honestly never even heard of this guy before, but man could he hoop back in high school. A lot of highlight variety, nice backing track, and the editing is also very solid. They've got those stupid darkened edges again, which is kind of annoying, but that's way too minor of a thing to penalize it for, because I was thoroughly entertained the whole time watching it. A lot of people claim this is an iconic mixtape, and after watching it, I definitely agree. A tier. Moving on now, we've got former NBA dunk contest champion Mac McClung and his official Ball is Life mixtape with 3.3 million views. One of the most explosive athletes to ever come out of high school basketball, and his mixtape did not disappoint. Dunks were obviously insane, but there were also quite a bit of nice guard skills displayed as well, with ball handling, shooting, tough layups. The editing is also on point, no darkened edges thankfully. The backtrack is pretty good as well, and side note, I can't believe it's already been 6 years since Mac was in high school. It literally doesn't feel like that long ago when I was seeing his highlights all over YouTube, but anyways, another awesome mixtape by Ball is Life, going in A tier. Up next, we've got another pretty ancient mixtape with James Harden's official Ball is Life mixtape at 1.7 million views, which was released over 14 years ago. However, unlike Brandon Jennings' mixtape, which is also really old, I'm not nearly as high on this one. For one, it's the shortest mixtape in the video, not even 2 minutes long, which isn't a problem at all really if all the other aspects of it are on point, but that's just not really the case here. Highlights are pretty meh. For such an offensive powerhouse like Harden, I expected a bit more. Editing is pretty decent, but nothing crazy. Backing track is pretty boring in my opinion. The mixtape just doesn't really have a lot going for it outside of just, hey, it's James Harden in high school. It's not a trash mixtape or anything, but I just have absolutely no desire to ever watch it again. Going to have to put it in D tier. Sorry, James. Getting near the end now, we've got the electrifying Malik Monk and his Hoop mixtape currently sitting at 1.6 million views. Just another absolute classic by Hoop mixtape. First thing I want to point out, they've always done a really good job choosing backing tracks, and this one's no exception. Absolute fire. The editing is also usually on point, and they did a great job with this one as well. Combine that with Malik Monk and his absolutely insane highlights, and you've got yourself another highly regarded and iconic mixtape going in A tier. Up next, we've got another pretty big name amongst high school basketball fans, and that's Malik Newman. And we're going to be looking at his official senior year mixtape by Courtside Films, currently at 1.7 million views. In terms of editing, this one's actually a bit different from all the others in the sense that its pacing is much slower. Most mixtapes are very fast-paced, bouncing between clips, trying to cram in as many highlights as they can, but this one takes a much slower approach. It kind of lets a lot of the clips play out a bit. I personally don't really mind this, especially since it's still edited pretty well, but I can definitely see how some people really wouldn't be a fan of that. Obviously, with Steph Curry in the title of the mixtape, there was going to be a lot of shooting highlights, which in my opinion aren't my favorite. I just think showcasing a bunch of threes gets a bit repetitive, but his shooting is impressive no doubt. I more so just prefer to see a lot of dunking and dribbling, but that's obviously just a personal preference, and there definitely is still a nice variety of highlights besides shooting, so I'm not going to penalize it too much for that. The backing track is pretty solid, but the thing that I don't really like is that this mixtape is over 9 minutes long, and they use the same track the whole way through. I really wish they would have changed it up a bit, but oh well, I guess. But yeah, man, this mixtape definitely does things a bit differently. Some work, some don't in my opinion, but still pretty solid. B tier. And now to finish up, saving my personal favorite mixtape for last, we've got John Wall's official Hoop mixtape, currently sitting at 10 million views. Boy oh boy, do I love this mixtape. I used to watch this thing on repeat all the time growing up. This is one of those iconic mixtapes that's in most people's top 3 favorites, and for quite a few, including myself, it is their all-time favorite. To start, one of the main reasons I've always come back to this mixtape is the backing track, easily my favorite mixtape track of all time, and the editing is absolutely spot on, really brings out the most of the track and the highlights. And speaking of the highlights, they're top notch. Wall was a beast in high school on both offense and defense, and that's on full display here. Just so much fun to watch, so entertaining, and one that even today I still check out pretty often. And even if this isn't your personal number one, you can't deny that this mixtape is super iconic and well made. But yeah, I think I've done enough glazing here. It's time to put this mixtape at the top of my list, taking the lone spot in S tier as my favorite high school basketball mixtape of all time. So that was 30 of the most iconic high school basketball mixtapes put into a tier list. I know there's going to be disagreeers, which is totally cool. We all have our own opinions, so feel free to leave in the comments where you change things up. I also know that there's tons of other mixtapes that I didn't include, guys like Grayson Allen, Michael Porter Jr., Emmanuel Mudiay, among others. So if you want to see a part 2 maybe with the best of the rest, be sure to let me know in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want to see more videos like this, because this is definitely a bit different from the type of videos that I normally make. But anyways, this is HCP signing off. As always, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm out. Peace.